Hello and welcome to the Stem Cell Network's webinar on effective abstract writing. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Geoff Hicks, the Director of the Regenerative Medicine Program and the Professor of Biochemistry and Medical Genetics at the University of Manitoba.
Hi, welcome everybody to this webinar. Thanks for the invitation, Josh. It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to this. This talk is about writing the great abstract, and it's really a talk about scientific writing in general. So all the things I'll discuss today you can use for your scholarship applications, for research grants, for whatever you're going to do in the future. And so that's kind of the perspective I'm going forward with. Feel free to ask any questions through the chat line with Josh at any point through the talk if you'd like, or we can wait till the end and I'll be happy to answer everyone's questions. So I have good news for you. There's this there. Whoop. Okay, so let's go. This is a talk I gave last year at the stem cell meeting in Ottawa, and it went over fairly well, I guess well enough to be invited back, so thanks again for that. And I've kept the format kind of the same because this is just 10 easy top 10 tips. There's secrets to good writing, scientific writing, and I'll generally talk about writing, but I'll try to bring it towards abstract writing towards the end of the talk to help make sure you get award-winning applications into the next stem cell meeting. So here's tip number one. It's good news. Scientific writing is formulaic. This is a direct quote from my good friend, Rod McGinnis. He was the first scientific director for the Institute of Genetics and the past interim president of CHR. Great scientist, great clinician, great teacher. We did 20 years of workshops at a meeting for new principal investigators across Canada. It's still ongoing. And much of what I'm going to tell you today is my top 10 insights into good grant writing, good abstract writing. So that's where my perspective comes from. That's where my experience comes from. And it really starts with Rod's wise words here that you don't have to be a fantastic writer. You don't even have to have written grants before. You can just jump in and do it because it's a formula. It's plug and play. It's a process you can learn easily. It's a plug and play formula that's you just fill the words in and you're basically done. You'll be done 90% of a good abstract or paper following these 10 tips. And from there, it's just practice, practice, practice. You know how that goes. I'm sure many of you were terrified when you did your first seminar or a group meeting with a PowerPoint. And as you know, it's just the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And the same is with grant writing or abstract writing. It's easy to get it done, and with time, the writing becomes easier, the polishing becomes easier, but the format doesn't change. So that's the good news. The second tip, science writing is expository. So that's a fancy word. It just means there are no flowery bits to scientific writing. It's clear, it's logical, and it's very similar to what you might imagine journalistic writing for the papers, for example, might be. Every paragraph is self-contained. The first sentence in every paragraph is the whole paragraph. So you don't need to actually read the rest of the paragraph to know what the paragraph is about. And that first sentence, that's expository writing, is the main point of that paragraph. It's the whole story. And if you've done a good job writing your poster, writing your paper, writing a scholarship, you always do the abstract last. And you should be able to almost take every first sentence of every paragraph, and that's it. Your abstract is done, and it's done really, really well. It's clear, logical, crystal. Have for you. Like, this week I'm busy writing 2 grants. So here's a paragraph I borrowed. My research is largely in fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. You may be aware many kids have a specific face, but that facial feature is only in 15% of the thousands of kids that have FASD. And unfortunately, it's only those kids that usually get a diagnosis. So 85% of children with FASD will never get a diagnosis. And that's what this paragraph is about. This paragraph has been crafted many times. The sentences are really good. Everything you need to know about that particular point is in here somewhere. But it does not have currently a really good lead sentence, a sentence that describes everything. And it just happened yesterday as a colleague was going over this section, the grants. She just wrote one, and here's what I thought I would share it with you. So that one sentence, now that FASD code will make the invisible visible. That's the whole paragraph. That's the take-home message. That's why we're doing this project. And so, although I would change that sentence a little more, the core of it, the essence, the 5 words or less, is dead on. There's no extra bits there. This is the crux of the whole paragraph. And you'll find in your writing, there's many times you can come back, and you'll find that sentence, the sentence that says the whole paragraph the best, is in your paragraph, but it's often in the middle, it's often at the end. And that's just a function of the way we talk. That's a story narrative that we lead up to things, and then we have our aha moment. When you're writing abstracts, papers, grants, there's no time for that. People will only see the first sentence, and you have to put that intentionally. It's not an easy exercise, it's a learned exercise, but it's an easily learned exercise. So I hope this example gives you an idea of what that means. And I'm sure many of you have been here before, the so-called burying the lead. And the truth is, people will read a lot of these things, they'll read them fast. And if they have to work at finding it in a dense paragraph, chances are they're going to miss it completely. So don't leave your best findings, your best points buried. Put it as the first sentence of the paragraph. And the whole paragraph is about providing details for that statement. Okay, that's scientific expository writing. Tip number 3, get your first draft down on paper, just barf it out. This is if I had to rank all the tips, this is number 1. Don't get stuck at Starbucks word crafting that first sentence or being clever about the words you use, or don't worry about that. You've already got an idea of what the poster is about, the paper is about. Just sit down and literally never look back. Just write for a day, 2 days, 3 days. Get everything down on paper, and I can guarantee you'll be 60% done the task if you get there. So start writing early, write daily, pick a time of the day that you feel most creative, most able to get things down on paper. And once you have a draft, and it doesn't matter how good or bad it is, once you have a draft, it's really, really easy to do all the next steps. So that's the one tip I really highly recommend. And again, this is something you need a bit of practice at. You have to think clearly, when do I write best? When can I be creative, undisturbed, and just get it out? That's a really important step. Step 4. Now that you got a big diatribe on paper there, step back and think, what is it I want to do in this abstract, this poster, this paper, this grant? And that really comes back to your central hypothesis. So that's the hypothesis or research question. It's the big idea. It's what the whole thing is about. And there you should spend time really thinking about stating that hypothesis as clearly as you can. And it's always good to have fewer words. The more you can contract an idea into 5 words, I typically tell my students, the clearer that idea becomes, right? And once you have a clear question or rephrased as a hypothesis, then you need to write 2 or 3 aims usually. These are specific aims or specific objectives. And these are really how you're going to test your question. So that's what that is. And again, there may be 1,000 questions for every good idea. And the task you have is which are the top 2 or 3 that will tell me the most about my question, or the most best ways to experimentally address the question. So for me, that's an objective. It's a test of your hypothesis. It is an experimental approach. And the expected outcomes of that question really support or answer your research question. So this is my second step, or you should probably have a draft of that first, but you don't really have to craft it until you've got everything out on paper. But you kind of, it's an iterative process. You need to come back to it every other day. And, you know, am I really asking the right question? And if you are, am I really asking the right experiments to answer that question? And this will change a lot. And every iteration you have will make the whole thing much tighter, much better, and much more compelling. So compelling is the next thing when you're stepping back and you have a clear idea what and how you're going to do it. You know, is this the reasonable thing to do? Is this the best question, the best approach? And so this is where you'll think about what to include for review of previous work by you and others. Your preliminary data is always important because it supports the rationale. And in this, in an abstract, you don't have a lot of space, but you're taking the top sentences, right? And so you'll find you can very readily and easily get a focused, succinct rationale for the project as articulated by your hypothesis. So these are is it a reasonable question? Is it a question of importance? And that's really tip number 6. Why is this important? As I said again, you know, you can do 1,000 experiments for 1,000 questions, but why is your question, your proposal, the most important? Or what is the significant new knowledge that will come out of your study? And in our fields, which is largely biomedical, this will start and finish with statements about a health problem and how your proposal will lead to new knowledge that improves health outcomes. So again, these are second, third draft exercises to really tighten up and hone your written work. Tip number 7. You need to, it's on you to tell how you're going to do something. Like, and by you, I mean you. Why you? Why should it be you of all the people in Canada doing this experiment? And that's going to come from a detailed work plan that shows your ideas are clear, logical, well thought out. They're feasible. So that's one half of this exercise. The other is you. Why you? And you'll need to have some statements about the work you've done, which shows in your hands this can be done, it's feasible, and that your expertise, and yes, you all have lots of expertise at this point to support any of these proposals, why it's relevant to the task at hand. And if it's not, that you are already realize that and have collaborators to fill those technical gaps. So that's the 7th idea. And this is really good and tighten the 3 things we're just talking about. So but by the time you get to here, I've got on your first rough draft and now 1 or 2 really, really good, well-focused, logical, well-supported drafts of your abstract or paper. So that's good. Now we're ready to start sharing it with others. And so that's tip number 8. This is my good friend, mentor, and colleague, Janet Rossent. I'm sure most of you know her or have heard of her in the network here. I remember when I was a young professor, and maybe like in the picture Josh showed you, not so much the one I am now, but I was writing a Genome Grant Canada grant with Janet, and I flew to Toronto. I was already my third draft. I thought I was pretty good at it, had a pretty good round ready. We sat down in her office Saturday morning, 8 o'clock, and she says, "Well, have you read the instructions?" And I guess unconvincingly said yes. And she just shook her head, and she said, "You must always start by reading the instructions." And she took them out. I went to the website, we looked at the instructions, and we went through point by point by point. And that was the way Janet Ressent starts writing a grant, or certainly doing a second or third draft. And this is a really, really good tip, because by then I and many of you will lost perspective completely about what is the task at hand. Here we're talking about an abstract for a poster for a stem cell network meeting, for example. Everything you need to do and know is in the instructions. What's the size of your poster? How many words for your abstract? Who's the audience? How will be judged? All that, the whole process of the review is in those instructions. The very nature of the call of what you're doing is in those instructions. So it's a really good point to always start there, but as a specific draft round of writing, go back to the instructions and make sure you've designed it to fit, to meet the process, and to actually address the event you're doing, if it's an abstract poster, or what you're writing, if it's a paper, or who you're writing to ask for a grant. Okay. So that's tip number 8. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the abstracts themselves. You're probably aware there's 2 general types. These are just old ones from my group, that what's written doesn't really matter for this exercise. But they, again, as Rod McKinnon says, it's formulaic. You don't have to make up how to write this. It's all plug and play. The first one on the left there is more a medical clinician kind of format, where you literally have those title sections, and you literally write in the answers to those 4 things. So that's pretty easy to follow. The objectives, that's going to include, your impact statement, your top level, some of your preliminary data, and your hypothesis and your names. So there's not a lot of room there. So you can probably start to appreciate how having those high level sentences for the body that you're abstracting from, if they're already good, you'll have a much easier time to get things to fit here. The method section, that's important because for meetings like this, where you have a distinct method section, people are going to come to your poster because you're doing things a certain way. Single cell sequencing, all the rage now. If you've got that in your work and you don't mention it, think of the numbers of people you're going to miss coming to your poster, because they just won't know. And everybody coming, I write these with the idea of like getting as many people who can help me with my project come to my poster, because then you're face to face and the discussion is really what science is all about. So don't sell yourself short by missing to say what might be obvious to you, the methods you're using to answer your question. The results are equally as important. People want to know what you're finding out. Again, this is pretty expository. This is results, right? Like, it's data. There's no spin to it. It is what it is. So these are bare truths without too much interpretation. And again, you want to interest people in your work. You want to have your work recognized because you believe it's important, and your finding is important, and this is where to do that. And then lastly, there's a conclusion statement. So here's where you can put some perspective on how you interpret your results in the context of your objectives in the first. And so if you think about it that way, yeah, that's only 3 or 4 sentences. If you've written your paper in an expository fashion, you probably have already got the 3 best well thought out sentences for this section. And again, you just plug them in. There's your first draft of the abstract. And so you can go back, run through the other tips, make sure you're hitting all those points, and you're basically gonna be left with a really pretty good abstract. The other abstract is more narrative in format. On the right here, this is a CHR summary actually, so it's a whole page. It's 2 or 3 times as long as a regular abstract. But I just want to point out that the formula is the same. Okay? What's a really good title? You know, your title should tell what the project is, what field you're in, and something about the outcome. So, you know, if you can get the title is your whole poster in 10 words, right? So that's pretty good tightening up. And that takes practice and time, just like every first sentence does. But again, the same headings are there. They're just not there in print. So you start with the background and rationale. You have your preliminary findings. That's evidence in your hand supporting where your project is going. You typically would state your hypothesis and the aims. And then in the aims, you would include your major approaches to the experimental questions you're asking. And it finishes off again with conclusions and significance. So the formula is pretty easy. And it's pretty easy to get your first draft down. And now we have some tips how to tighten up. Last year, we had this talk at the meeting. So everybody at the meeting was already there with their posters, and their posters all had abstracts that were submitted. So I had to look through a few dozen of them, and I was just looking for things that I thought were done well. So this is a real abstract from a real poster. And what I'm just going to go take a few minutes to go through it with you and tell you why I thought it was good. So again, there's not a lot of space in abstracts, and an abstract is an abstract of paper. So the opening background, it's in Canada, patients with esophageal cancer have a 5-year survival rate of only 14%. I thought that's a great opening introduction and introductory statement. It tells you what the project's about. It tells you it's about real health and people, and it gets your attention. 14% survival is a big problem. And so as a reader, I know what already the whole thing is going to be about in terms of biomedical health. And I'm interested in reading more. Then it goes into, only one more sentence of background. And this is why, fewer words, clear sentences are really important. And right away, you're into the preliminary findings because that's all the space we have. And again, in the first sentence of that, I thought this was really clearly stated, easy for anybody to understand. They've got already good data showing this marker marks a population of cells which have stem cell renewal and regenerative capacities. Great, and now I really know where they're coming from, that this is probably a reworded version of their hypothesis. So it's really well done in terms of, now I'm really right into the preliminary data. The rationale, this is the next thing in red. And so again, it's like a 1 sentence, 10 words, starting with the stem cells. It's a promising strategy to improve survival and treatment of these cancer patients. Great. And right away, then we're into clear aims. So we aim to characterize these, develop an unbiased approach, identify new players, and in this context. Fabulous. Again, the aims are right there. First, second, they're succinct, and the methods and approaches are in there. They're in the lighter blue. So I can see right away, oh, this is a transgenic model. That's what I'm into. I go through this poster just knowing that. It's tumor formation, it's stem cell assays, it's using chemotherapeutic approaches, mass spec is used, so there's some kind of omics going on here. That's exactly the kind of thing that has all the right bits in there. And lastly, we're right away to, again, another pretty clear, well thought out conclusion or significant statement that goes back through the hypothesis to the original problem. And so for me, I thought this was a really well written abstract. And so that's something you can do in your fourth, fifth draft, look at it in this light. Am I really clearly coming out in these kinds of ways? Okay. Tip number 9, start early, finish early, right? I can't say I'm the best one at deadlines. I'm talking about 2 grants that are due tomorrow, that I'm working on. But the earlier you finish, the more time you have for these other rounds of review, and to seek advice and ask others for review. It's amazing to me how many times trainees are reluctant to ask their PI because they think they're too busy, or what do they know? Trust your PI that they're the reason you're there doing the work you do. And so make sure you have enough time to have your PI take time to read and give you results. Giving it a day or 2 before, sometimes even a week before, kind of shoots in the foot a little bit. Make sure you have time for that with your PI, because they also need to know what you do, what you're presenting, and they're there to mentor you directly. You can and should take advantage of your peers or colleagues or professors. And again, if you have enough time, you can do that and just ask them to read it. You get a fresh read, a fresh perspective, and probably a lot of insight. Your friends are always good, but we all know when we get reviews back and it's typos and corrections, and that's helpful, but that's not the kind of review you want to get back. You want serious constructive criticism that's not afraid to improve the quality of what you're trying to do. And then lastly, proofread, proofread, proofread. You literally have to put your finger on every word as you say them out loud when you're in some of these draft reviews, to hear yourself how the sentences come out, how other people would read it. Another thing is it gives you time to allow the proposal to know it's flowing logically, to make sure everybody can read it and understand, not just the experts, which will be few as you go out to meetings and journals and high journals especially for your own fellowship renewals. People have to be able to access what you're saying and get into it. So it has to be comprehensible to everybody and readable. So pull out all the jargon, all the abbreviations, all the acronyms, all the syntax that just makes people stumble over it. And makes people stall and wonder, what the heck is that? So that's another good advice. Listen to what people say. If you're going to send a draft out to somebody, make sure you've spell checked it, make sure it's good already. So they're spending time giving you the feedback you want them to give her. And so the more you do this, send it out to 5 people or whatever, you're going to get 5 very different points. You don't have to accept everybody's advice, but you should consider it. What are they trying to say? Does it help or improve me? What are they not getting? Because maybe I'm not saying it well enough. And for heaven's sakes, don't be defensive. That's hard. That's really hard. Human nature. This is a creation of yours. It's a baby abstract of paper. You put your heart and soul into the research and the writing, and you're going to be protected of it. But you have to let that go. You have to let that just wash off you, and then go back, be very logical again, and try to ask those questions. What is it they're not getting? What is it I'm not getting? And what do I need to incorporate to make sure this is clear and accessible to everyone? And that's really important because you need everybody. That's the final tip here. Write to your champion. This is what I always tell people. This is my tip of the top 10. Many of you may not have been on review panels yet, review panels for your fellowship, for your grants, for your paper. Um, and often, so that process is a bit unknown to you, but they're all reviewed. And in the end, whether it's 2 reviewers, 3 reviewers, or editor, 10 people on the panel, they're all gonna have a vote and whether you get funded, get published or not. And so accessibility is really important. And once you've done all those previous 9 tips, you need to go back and ask this, am I writing this to my champion? And by that, I mean, if you have one person, so let's say it's a grant review, you may have 20 people on the panel, all 20 people vote. Only 2 people have read your whole paper. Only maybe 4 people have read your abstract. So they're the only ones with an informed mind or informed statement. And if you haven't been clear, they can't do that job. If you haven't excited that one person who's going to be the one to stand up and say, I'll never do this process again if it's not this person that gets funded because it's the best thing I've ever seen, then you'll be behind the 8 ball. So by this, I mean 2 things. First, literally give them the phrasers of the sentences they can just copy and paste to as their major reasons for holding this up to the highest caliber. That's easy to do, especially in the last draft. Am I giving them literally the words they need to fight for my paper, for my livelihood, for my publication, right? And the second thing is give them the words to refute what might be common criticisms of your work. And so there's many things that you might not see if you haven't had a wide reading that could be reasons people don't like your paper or might think we don't know enough to know this is a top paper. And so this is often in the pitfalls and alternate explanations or plans. And so again, literally use the words you think will be the biggest criticisms of your work and then answer them. So now your champion can not only stand up for you, but also refute statements that will bring the impact of your work down. So that's really about papers or longer pieces of work, but it's also true for abstracts. You know, abstracts for meetings like this one will be judged. They will be reviewed for oral presentations. All of that is by committees and panels of people. So when you go through the last draft of anything you're working on, make sure in there it's clear things for your champion to say, things to deal with the reasonable criticisms. Okay, so that's about half an hour. Here's the top 10 tips. I think they will help you. I know they've helped me. You know, I was telling you I was writing a grant this week and Monday I'm writing the abstract again. And I thought, oh my God, I'm giving this talk on how to write an abstract on Thursday. And I wonder if I've really followed my own tips. And so anyways, I popped the slide up, I looked at it again, and you know, I went back and I changed several things in the abstract that I had already thought was well written. And so this is just my own testimonial that these tips, at least for me, really helped me get to the point of a really great piece of scientific writing. And so I hope you can find in them several that will help you. I'm happy to answer any questions you have now. And that's a conclusion of the talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hicks. I think on behalf of the Stem Cell Network and the attendees of this session, we are so grateful that you were able to offer your experience and your presentation style. We definitely appreciate that. And I'm sure that all of the online viewers of this video, my fellow colleagues, graduate students, and postdocs are going to take away a lot from all of your fantastic tips. Dr. Hicks, 10 tips or so. And we definitely have a couple questions rolling in for you as well.
Okay.
The first question is, would the formatting change if you were writing an abstract for a review paper?
No. Well, the format literally would be different, but the process will be the same. You're going to have a word count. You're going to have to still, whatever you're writing an abstract for, it's an abstraction of the larger body of work, right? And so I think if you're following some of the principles I talked about here about writing the draft, the focus on certain things, expository writing, um, you can start your abstract by just trying that first sentence pull. Pull all the first sentences and look at what it says, and then every a review will be more general. It won't have a hypothesis, but a review should have a perspective, right? Uh, um, Writing reviews, there's a review for your thesis, which is like, here's everything in the literature, and that's kind of the review most trainees are familiar with. But a review paper is not that. A review paper should have it doesn't have a hypothesis, but it has a hypothesis like setting, and that's a statement of opinion of uh, here's what, to me, presumably expert in the field or knowledgeable in the field, sees as the current um, uh, body of knowledge for what we're talking about, and here's where we need to go. So that's a hypothesis-like statement for a review paper. And again, if you have that, people are going to read it. Uh, if you have articulated that, more people are going to read it. So it's just like the idea of getting people to come to your poster is something that you need to review in your drafts of your abstract. For your review paper abstract, you need to have that hypothesis version, review version, so you get people coming to it, and there has to be enough there to get people interested. Uh, the most people's highly cited papers can be the review papers. So that's a good question. It's a good skill. I know you will all be asked to participate. So my advice to you in terms of the abstract is to set up the basic principles so you're achieving that goal of a review abstract and adding to the body of work to where this field should go. What is the big question now in this field based on the preliminary data? So the formula is the same, the perspective is different, but successfully doing it is what's going to make your paper highly cited.
It's definitely a good time to be getting ready to write review papers during the pandemic.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. We always get as PIs, why don't you put a special edition together or a book? And I'm thinking, yeah, people have time now over the summer anyways. And it's a really good opportunity for trainees to get more papers out. But that would be my advice. Make sure you not just rebarfing out a PubMed search. What do you think the state of the field is and where's it going? That's what a review paper is.
Absolutely. Our next question, when writing a scientific abstract for a wider audience or the general public, do you have some tips, i.e. not to lose too much of the science, but to be in general terms for a wider access?
Sure. Take out all those jargon words. Don't have your sentences too long. Make 2 sentences or 3 out of 1 long sentence. Make sure every point you're making is clear, and use simple language. There's places within even a short abstract that you can speak directly to the experts in the field. But again, the important thing is you have people coming to your poster, coming to your paper, where you'll have plenty of room for the rest of it. And this is again why you need to have people read your abstract or paper outside your direct field. So you'll get an idea pretty quickly what's making sense and what isn't making sense. And that's the best way you can do to make sure it's successful.
If my abstract submission does not ask for specific structure, for example, intro methods, etc., do you recommend including these as headings anyways?
That's a personal style. So it's up to you. It's certainly in draft one, put them down. uh, and whatever helps you get the writing started. But in the end, it's still the same formula. You still have to have all those components that I mentioned in the head-to-head formats. So you can count on this formula. It's kind of doesn't really change much from field to field or beyond. So it's a solid place to start. And that's at the end, it's style of the journal, maybe it's your style. I don't get too much into whether you have it or not, but people have to see it, right? People have to know what your main question is. People have to know what your experimental objectives are. People have to know what's coming out of the work. So it's start with headings if that helps you to do the writing, but it's not necessary at the end.
And lastly, we have a comment just saying that it was a very nice presentation and they really appreciate it. And they want to thank you, Dr. Hicks and the Stem Cell Network.
Well, thank you.
And also we need to take criticism seriously, but not personally. Couldn't agree with that more.
It's tough. It's really tough. It's still, and now if I get a paper rejected, I don't get the grant, it's just crushing. There's no, so just wallow it in for a day or two, don't fire off emails and come back. But when you come back, talk to your colleagues, talk to your PI. You're not alone in that. And then a week later, reread whatever it was, the review, your reply, your response, because you'll see it completely differently when you're not in that initial mood. And I remember my first CHR grant, I worked a lot on that. It was a big deal for me. And it came back with a score of 2.9. So I don't know if you're aware of the scales, but that's like not even fundable. I was just crushed. I went to my mentor at that time a week later, and he said, wait 4 days, come and see me. So I did that. And he read the same reviews I read, and he said, this is amazing. This is wonderful. And I couldn't believe that he was reading the same thing I had read. And then he explained to me like what the review was really telling me. And it was step-by-step instructions how to turn this thing around, what they're missing, what didn't come across. I wrote it and it ranked second in the next round. So that's the story I try to remember all the time when I'm in the moment of rejection.
I'm gonna have to remember that when I'm writing grants as well. Thank you so much for your incredible tips. We've reached all of the questions and comments from the audience so far. I know that I'm definitely going to be taking your 10 tips to heart when I'm writing my own abstract for this year's Till McCulloch conference in the fall. And I hope that our audience takes your tips to heart as well, because they are fantastic.
Thank you. Well, I'm happy to answer any questions that come up later for folks. You can email me if you like.
Absolutely. Is there an email you'd like us to reach you at?
It'll be easy to find. It's jeff.hicks@umanitoba.ca.
Fantastic. Thank you once again for your talk today. We really appreciate all of your helpful tips and hints, and we hope that everybody takes them to heart for your upcoming abstract submissions for the Till McCulloch conference.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity.